Okay, so it appears that my previous piece piqued your interest to a sufficient degree for me to feel justified in writing this one. Yes, I am still alive, and nobody at my place of employment is aware of or suspects anything about my prior post. Thus, to maintain my own security, I will continue to utilize aliases and fictitious names, just as I did in that original post. I suppose I should pick up where I left off and tell you all when I discovered the true nature of my employment. Kind of. When I spoke to Larry at his office about my, shall we say, concerns, he urged me to meet him at the diner. We had agreed to meet in the late morning, or the time between breakfast and lunch when I arrived. The diner was reasonably busy, which was actually rather shrewd because it would have been ridiculous for us to enter while it was absolutely crowded and talk about what we would be talking about. Instead, we wanted just enough people to enter to drown out our conversation, but not so much that we're crammed in so closely that someone might be able to overhear the conversation without our realizing it. I approached Larry, who was sat in a booth toward the rear of the cafe, and he motioned me down. I pretended to be friendly as I approached the waitress by grinning at her. Looking back, I think I may have been a little bit excessive. I sit down and Larry says, "Glad you made it. Ready to speak business?" I griddle quickly. "Yes, but how about placing an order?" "It will be on me, so go ahead and buy what you want. It also makes us appear less strange. We appreciate you." He took a long breath and appeared to stop to collect his thoughts once our waiter came over and we placed our orders. He says quietly, cupping his hands together, like a parent prepared to have an important conversation with his child. "So, do you believe in the supernatural, Olivia?" There's really no way I could say this without sounding crazy, I guess would be the best term to use here. His question caught me off guard. When I first started seeing ghost hunting programs or purported recovered footage of paranormal happenings, I was more than a bit dubious. But even then, after only a few weeks on the job, I was much more open to the notion that there are forces outside of ourselves. I respond to Larry, "Let's just say I haven't ruled out the possibility." "Okay, so some of the information I'm about to give you isn't even accurate," he says, just before taking a sip of his drink. "I'll tell you what I know, but the true facts are much above even my clearance level." "Why are you so willing to do this, may I ask? Why are you so eager to risk losing your job so that I can learn about this, even though I know I asked for it? Why put yourself in danger for me? There are only so many times I can go home to my wife and kids and pretend that the things I see and the things I hear about are absolutely normal. So I need someone else I can talk to about this stuff, to be very honest. Every night when I get home, I tell them even more falsehoods about what I do, because the last thing I need is to put their safety in danger. After a while, it becomes really exhausting to keep everything to oneself. And yes, you are free to remind me that this is what I agreed to when I signed up for it. But at the end of the day, I'm simply a man. Nothing more, nothing less. And I find it exhausting to keep this all to myself." I said, "Well, good point. However, it still places you perilously close to the brink. Is it really worth the risk to your job, in your life?" After pausing and heaving a gentle sigh, Larry responds. Larry pauses. "I've learned now it's worth the risk." And I interject with a query. "What you're trying to say is that we essentially keep watch over a haunted structure." Haunted does not imply that the building itself is unfriendly. Rather, it suggests that there is something hostile inside. I froze, understanding what he was getting at with that final sentence, but still struggling to accept it. How may a structure be hostile? These make sense. Ghosts, demons, werewolves, and cryptids. They can be sentient, living things with instincts, desires, and emotions. But a chunk of concrete and bricks. How? I say, the structure itself. The hungry house hypothesis is something you may have heard of. No, most people haven't, and the reason why is that you're not supposed to. Technically, even I shouldn't. So, how are you? I indulged in a little snooping and poked my nose into a few inappropriate spots. Almost landed me in trouble a few times, but I managed to get out of it. The hungry house hypothesis is a straightforward yet extremely bizarre theory. And that theory is that structures, particularly homes and slash, or other constructions built to house people for extended periods of time, gain a small amount of sentience, intelligence, or whatever else you want to call it, from individuals who occupy them. They pick up some of our human consciousness, in a way. Imagine being in the middle of a lake on a boat. No matter how hard you try, you're going to end up with a little bit of additional moisture. Before Larry can finish, I say, I realize that this is not the best analogy, but you see where I'm going. Houses in particular begin to nearly reciprocate feelings of affection toward persons who live there over time. However, individuals move on, go to new areas, and leave things behind as they do with a lot of things in life, including their homes. One way to express it would be abandonment. And how do people typically feel after being left behind? Sometimes they feel angry, betrayed, and injured. People are the sole and exclusive reason that buildings are constructed. So when they lose that meaning, they start acting spitefully, just like a person would. Although it may sound like I'm babbling, this is the best manner I could come up with to convey it. Your home and workplace not only provide shelter for living creatures, but also provide for their needs. Consider a womb rather than a house more often. The sounds made by the flooring during the night. The sound of pipes rattling is the building talking to itself and communicating in its own peculiar way. Have you ever searched your home for a lost item only to discover that it is nowhere to be found despite your best efforts? That's one way it likes to talk to you. It wants you to look everywhere, peer into every corner, and investigate its inner workings. It serves as a kind of bonding activity. We have you on at night because the structure becomes a little uneasy when the residents lock up and depart for the evening. Watching and keeping an eye on things, I'll be sure to dig into the mystery of the figure in the window the night you left, though. I couldn't help feeling both nervous and uncertain. After any additional background, what he was saying startlingly made sense. Furthermore, I was at a loss for any other rational explanation for what I was observing. On the surface, it seemed crazy, but given what I had seen, I wasn't ready to dismiss it out of hand. In conclusion, are buildings sentient? I inquire. I'm going to assume that you have some inquiries. Yes, I do. I just need some time to reflect and process it. Although I do accept you, accepting is not the same as believing. Before our server brought the food we had ordered to our table, minutes had elapsed. The remainder of our meal was consumed in silence. We would undoubtedly continue to talk about it in the future. When it came time for my next shift, I was essentially operating under a completely new attitude, viewing the work as more of a service than a responsibility, if that makes any sense. It gave me a strange sort of comfort to know why I was acting the way I was now that I understood it better. One that would quickly be taken from me. Just a few evenings later, there I was, seated in my chair in the fortified office, gazing at the monitors and waiting for something to show up. I held my energy drink tightly and drank while I kept watching. And nothing had changed for a time. It was a night that was mostly unremarkable. All that is, until I caught a glimpse of an anomaly on camera one, also known as the building's foyer. A framed piece of art depicting a photorealistic Abraham Lincoln looking directly at the fictitious viewer was located on the right wall perpendicular to the front door. Simple image of good old Abe gazing blankly into the camera was all that was present. But what I saw right away gave me a little pause. To be sure of what I was seeing, I zoomed in. Abe's eyes were completely opaque, including the iris and pupil, as if someone had used a Sharpie to painstakingly color them in. I took detailed notes of what I observed because it was an anomaly I hadn't previously encountered, a sinking sensation developing in my gut as I wrote. It didn't do anything but sit there and stare out into the lobby through those two vacant voids. I have never felt more closely scrutinized while working as I did in those circumstances. It was more on the verge of disturbing than truly horrifying, in my opinion. You're all probably familiar with the phenomenon of feeling in danger when there is actually no immediate danger to you. It was similar to that, but now that I had heard everything Larry had told me, I could understand why I felt watched. I was always being watched by the building around me while I was working on this project, in every room and from every perspective. If this building decided to retaliate, did the blocked door this room was behind even stand a chance of keeping me safe? That's the nicest way to express it, I think. Another anomaly appeared on camera 3, the main hallway on the second floor, as I continued to search the monitors. My ground. The entry-level office's door had suddenly appeared to be partially open, which caused me to turn to a new page in my notebook to figure out what was wrong. But as I sat there, letting my ink stain the paper, a quick, moderately pitched hissing sound, which sounded like hot air moving through thin pipes, came from the left side of the room. I turned around and looked directly at the wall that was emitted the sound as if expecting something to fall through. Of course, that didn't happen. Instead, the hissing continued as before and alternated with a low cracking sound, similar like someone clambering up shaky wooden stairs. Even though I made an effort to tune it out, it kept bugging me despite my efforts to ignore it. I eventually turned around to face camera 1 again. To my surprise, I then discovered that the black-eyed Lincoln painting was no longer present anywhere on the wall. I turned the camera around right away to see if I could see where it might have gone or been moved to. But what I saw only served to corroborate what I already knew. The painting was nowhere to be seen, and certainly not in that room. I quickly checked the hallway camera, but there was nothing unusual that I hadn't already noticed. I switched to camera 4 as a result of this, and got the same outcome. It was likewise the same with cameras 5 and 6. But as soon as a recognizable sound entered the room and drowned out the hissing coming from the wall, I instantly froze in my seat. It was a high-pitched beeping that went on incessantly. I look over at camera 7's monitor and notice 2 words written in large, bold, white characters in the upper right-hand corner. It says, "Motion detected." For a few seconds, my eyes are glued to it, as if I were in some type of trance. I quickly recovered, though, and turned to face the center of the monitor, right where the building's back entrance was shown in the frame. I unconsciously tightened my hold on my pen as soon as I noticed the image there, leaning up against the door. The back of the building was what he was staring into lifelessly. I immediately started writing down the times, the changes in positions, and whatever other detail I could think of. My shift had just 1 hour left at that moment. No matter what occurs around the time I have to clock out, Larry had advised me to depart and not to be concerned about what I encounter once I have finished working. When I leave the building, I should be careful, but once I'm outside, I should act as if this location doesn't exist. I'll accept that even though it's not something you typically hear from a supervisor. After roughly 20 minutes, the hissing and creaking in the wall started to subside. However, I wouldn't say that I had reached a place where I could unwind. But in terms of irregularities, everything had somewhat calmed down. Over the previous 30 minutes, nothing else had occurred. I allowed myself to ruminate as I glanced idly at the displays and glanced through the camera feeds. At that time, processing everything, including my circumstances, my choices that got me there, and everything Larry and I had talked about, was my top priority. I drank on the last of my energy drink as I tried to squeeze in one last caffeine shot before my shift was over. I didn't really anticipate getting much sleep tonight, or should I say today, so I didn't really intend on going to bed when I got home like I usually did. I was fortunate to have the following day off so I could run some errands, perhaps go out with some friends, and feel a little more normal. Naturally, I was unable to reveal specifics of my job while performing the latter. I always said, just a government job, if work was mentioned, and if they inquired further. I didn't hesitate to admit that I had only faxed and filed the necessary documentation. I gathered my belongings and packed up as the timer ran out and my turn arrived. Then left the office and entered the corridor to lock the door. My key jingled and clanged when I entered it into the door's lock mechanism as it came out of my pocket. When I did, The same sense of being watched slowly returned to me. I'm not sure how to describe it, and I'm not even sure if I can, but it felt stronger this time. But I'll try my hand at it nevertheless. The previous time, I had the impression that something was stalking me down the hallway and keeping an eye on everything I did. I had a stronger mental image of it as a concrete, lone threat, something horrible waiting around the corner. However, this time I had the impression that the hallway itself was keeping an eye on me. Like every square inch of the room was watching me constantly from the floor, ceiling, and walls. Do you want to know what is most absurd about it? I wasn't sure which one I detested the most. I gazed at the hall, and the strewn shadows and darkness seemed to stare directly back at me. In spite of this, it lacked a face, a mouth, and any form of eyes. As ridiculous as it sounds, I nearly got the impression that it was trying to communicate with me. As I peered down the hallway, what should have only been a few seconds felt like minutes, and I eventually had to shake my head to bring myself back to reality. Similar to someone who has recently lost focus at work, I hurriedly finished locking up before once more choosing to go up the stairs rather than use the elevator. After that first attempt, I would continue manufacturing it for the foreseeable future. This time, as I was walking to my car, I was careful not to look at the building because I reasoned that it would be better for me to avoid seeing something I wasn't expecting. Additionally, my shift was done, so I was no longer responsible for the unspeakable evils. I succeeded in getting home. However, following my recent epiphany, I felt slightly differently about it, but I was a responsible homeowner who valued my home. I was therefore okay, right? For the sake of my own sanity, I probably shouldn't dwell on this for too long. I'll stop here. I don't know when I'll be able to post again, but it will happen eventually. This is Olivia saying goodbye.